Today, we're going to talk about the behind-the-scenes stories of Mel Gibson's film. Some might see it as some kind of supernatural calling. Others may say that the movie The Passion of the Christ started with an unexpected vision. Have you ever felt like something just couldn't be a coincidence? That somehow you were meant to be exactly in that place at that moment because something bigger was at play? What if I told you that one of the most impactful films in cinema history started with an event so mysterious that even its director avoids talking about it in detail? Behind the scenes of The Passion of the Christ, there are stories that few people know, stories that weren't captured by the cameras but carry a weight as significant as the film's narrative itself. One of those stories happened to Mel Gibson himself, even before the project began. Rumor has it that it all started on an ordinary night. Gibson was alone, sitting in his office surrounded by stacks of old books about the history of Christianity. He was doing research, as any filmmaker would when embarking on a project of this magnitude. But something happened that night. Something that made him stop. A faint candlelight beside him flickered, casting uneasy shadows on the wall. The silence was almost absolute, except for the occasional sound of the wind hitting the windows. Then something caught his eye. A blank page. In the middle of notes and underlined passages, there was a completely blank piece of paper. But Gibson didn't remember leaving it there. With a shiver running down his spine, he picked up the sheet and felt his heart race. And then, without explanation, something began to appear. Not like ordinary writing, not like something that had been printed or scribbled. It was as if an image was forming, little by little, before his eyes. He blinked, rubbed his fingers against his temples, convinced that he was just tired. But the vision didn't disappear. What emerged there, on that empty page, was the silhouette of a man, a face, the features, the marks of suffering, the intense gaze. It was the image of Jesus, but not just any image. It was exactly how he had imagined he should be in the film. The sensation was so strong that Gibson felt his body tremble. He got up from his chair, his eyes fixed on the sheet, hoping the effect would pass, that it was just a trick of the mind. But the figure remained there. He tried to touch the paper, flip the sheet over, look against the light to see if there was anything printed there. Nothing. But the vision, somehow, was still etched in his mind. It was at that moment that he felt an invisible weight on his shoulders, a calling, as if something or someone was telling him that this project wasn't just a film, that there was something bigger involved. In the following days, he tried to forget the episode. He continued his research, organized meetings, discussed budgets, but in every little detail of the project, he felt that presence again. As if the film was being guided by something he couldn't explain, and Gibson wasn't the only one to feel it. A few weeks later, when the script was already taking shape, one of his production assistants walked into his office, visibly shaken. She said that she had dreamed of a scene from the film, a scene that hadn't even been written yet. In the dream, she saw Jesus carrying the cross, falling to the ground, while a storm formed around him. She woke up in a panic, sweating, and felt an uncontrollable urge to tell Gibson. He listened to her in silence, feeling the hairs on his arms stand on end, because that very scene was already in his mind, exactly as she described it. Coincidence? Maybe. But as production progressed, more and more stories like that emerged. Accounts of people dreaming of scenes that hadn't even been planned, yet small details being changed in the script because they seemed out of place, as if something was directing the film where it needed to go. And then came the greatest sign of all. The night before Gibson officially signed the production contracts, a close friend, a man who had never read a single line of the script, gave him a gift. It was an old book, a study on Christian iconography. "You need to read this," he said. Gibson picked up the book, curious and opened it at random. The first image he saw was exactly the one he had seen on the blank sheet weeks before. At that moment, he knew. It wasn't just a film. It was a calling. And the events that followed would prove it in a frighteningly real way. Have you ever heard of a film that not only changed the audience, but also broke the actors themselves? That the weight of playing their characters was so intense that even off camera they couldn't escape it. The Passion of the Christ wasn't just a film for those who were there. It was an experience that left marks that to this day many prefer not to comment on in public. I remember the first time I heard about what really happened on set. It wasn't in an interview or in an official documentary. It was during a casual conversation with someone who worked behind the scenes. And what he told me gave me chills. Caviezel, the actor who played Jesus, knew that the role would be challenging. He was prepared for the physical exertion, for the painful scenes of the crucifixion, for the emotional weight of portraying Christ's suffering. But what he wasn't prepared for was what would come when the cameras stopped rolling. After filming some of the first scenes of the flagellation, Jim began to have trouble sleeping. He described that whenever he closed his eyes, he saw the face of Jesus, not the character he was playing, but an even more real, more intense version, as if he was looking at him through time. At first, he thought it was just the stress of the job, but then the dreams started. He dreamed of scenes that weren't in the script, visions of places he had never seen before, but that he would later describe as biblical landscapes. In one of those dreams, he saw Jesus carrying the cross, but when he looked closer, he realized that the face of Jesus was his own. Jim began to share these dreams with the rest of the crew, but what he didn't expect was that he wasn't alone. Maya Morgenstern, who played Mary, also began to have similar dreams. In one of them, she held the body of Jesus in her arms, just as she did in one of the most emotional scenes of the film. But in that dream, she felt the real weight of the body, as if she were holding a real son. When she woke up, the emotional impact was so strong that she spent the whole day in silence, unable to disconnect from the sadness she carried. And it wasn't just the main actors. Costume designers, camera operators, even production assistants reported strange sensations. Some said they felt as if they were being watched while they worked, even when there was no one around. Others talked about a feeling of oppression, as if the environment itself was too heavy. But what really caught the attention was when one of the members of the technical crew, a man known for being skeptical and rational, asked to leave the project. He said that during the night shoots he had heard voices whispering his name in the middle of the empty set. At first, he thought it was pranks from his colleagues, but then he realized he was alone. The experience was so disturbing that he couldn't continue. He described the set as a place where the line between the real and the spiritual was beginning to disappear. These experiences began to affect the rhythm of the production. There were days when the crew simply couldn't film. The emotional weight was too great. Mel Gibson, despite being known for his perfectionism, began to realize that something beyond human control was at play. On one occasion, he interrupted the recordings and asked a priest to come to the set to bless the location. After that, things improved, temporarily. But what's most curious is that even after filming ended, many of those involved continued to feel the effects. Caviezel stated years later that playing Jesus changed his life in a way he never could have predicted. He said that the role left physical and emotional marks that never completely disappeared. And you? Have you ever wondered what happens when art and spirituality meet in such an intense way that no one can escape unscathed? If you're enjoying this content, don't forget to like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel to increase your faith. Have you ever witnessed something that simply can't be explained by logic? A moment when technology, so reliable, so precise, fails for no reason, as if something invisible were pulling the strings behind the scenes. Let me take you to the set of The Passion of the Christ, where the impossible became routine. Imagine the scene. A meticulously prepared set, each camera calibrated, each microphone tested, the tight schedule, the budget counted down to the last detail, and then, at the most crucial moment, when everyone is ready to record, nothing works. And it wasn't a common technical problem. It wasn't a failure that could be explained by a loose wire or a blown fuse. We're talking about equipment that stopped working repeatedly, always in the most symbolic moments, as if the environment itself was fighting against the filming. There was one day in particular that was etched in everyone's memory. It was a central scene, Jesus carrying the cross under the scorching sun, surrounded by Roman soldiers. The team was positioned, the cameras rolling, and then the sound disappeared. Literally. The microphones, which had been tested minutes before, simply stopped picking up anything. No noise, no dialogue, nothing. It was as if the very air around was absorbing the sound. The sound operator, an industry veteran with decades of experience, was perplexed. He checked the equipment, changed cables, restarted the systems. Nothing worked. The strangest thing. When they tried to record other scenes, the sound came back normally, but whenever they returned to that cross sequence, the sound vanished. And it wasn't just the audio. The cameras also began to malfunction. In another scene, during the crucifixion, the images captured came out distorted, as if an invisible interference was affecting the film. The curious thing? These distortions only appeared when Caviezel was on the cross. When the camera filmed other angles, everything was perfect. But when focusing on Jesus' face, the image began to tremble, as if something was trying to prevent that recording. The cinematographer became obsessed with finding an explanation. He changed lenses, adjusted the lighting, even changed cameras. But the problem persisted. It was then that someone on the team suggested something that, at first glance, seemed absurd. What if it's not a technical problem? That phrase changed the atmosphere on set. No one wanted to admit it, but everyone was thinking the same thing. It was as if something, or someone, was interfering in the process. Something that didn't want those scenes to be filmed. The tension reached its peak when, during a night shoot, all the lighting equipment simply went out. The entire set plunged into darkness. The generator was working, but the lights weren't. Technicians ran to check the cables, the fuses, everything seemed to be in order. And then, without any explanation, the lights came back on by themselves. But what really gave everyone the chills was what happened next. When the technicians reviewed the recordings from that day, they found something that no one expected. In one of the scenes where the lights had failed, the microphones picked up a whisper. It wasn't a common interference sound, but a voice. Low, almost imperceptible, muttering words in a language that no one could identify. They called audio specialists to analyze the material. What they discovered was even more disturbing. The whisper seemed to be in ancient Aramaic, the same language that was being used in the film. But the strangest detail? No one had spoken during that recording. The set was completely silent. Mel Gibson, upon hearing about the incident, made a decision that shocked everyone. He brought a priest to the set to perform a special blessing. It's not something you'd expect on a big Hollywood production, but at that moment it seemed the only solution. After the blessing, the technical problems diminished, but didn't completely disappear. And this raises an intriguing question. Does technology, as advanced as it may be, have its limits when confronted with forces that we cannot understand? And what if what happened on the set of The Passion of the Christ wasn't just a series of technical failures, but a sign? Something trying to show us that there's more between heaven and earth than we can explain with circuits and cables? I ask. Would you be ready to face something like that? Work in an environment where every sound captured, every image filmed, could be more than just part of a film, but part of something much greater. That's the thin line between the world we know and the unknown. And on the set of The Passion of the Christ, that line was crossed many times. Have you ever had that feeling that something invisible is messing with you, that there's a force that can't be explained by logic? Now, imagine that happening in a place where everyone is focused, concentrated on a goal. And suddenly, the technology just stops working. For no reason, without explanation. That's exactly what happened during the filming of The Passion of the Christ. And before you think it was a common technical problem, let me tell you what really happened behind the scenes. Because what happened on that set made a lot of people, even the most skeptical, start to wonder if the film was being guided by something beyond human skill. It all started subtly. In the early days of recording, the sound equipment began to malfunction. Microphones picked up strange noises, whispers in languages that no one could identify. At first, the audio team thought it was interference from the environment. After all, they were filming in outdoor locations, surrounded by ancient structures and materials that could cause some kind of echo. But those whispers weren't normal. They only appeared during the most intense scenes, those that portrayed the pain and suffering of Jesus. And the most bizarre thing? When the technicians tried to reproduce the recordings to identify the problem, nothing appeared. The audio seemed perfect, as if the sounds had never existed. And that was just the beginning. The cameras began to fail at crucial moments. During one of the most important scenes, the crucifixion, the equipment simply stopped working, without warning, without apparent reason. The team tried everything, changing batteries, replacing cables, even restarting the systems. Nothing worked. It was as if some force was preventing those scenes from being recorded. Now, you may think, okay, technical problems happen. But let me tell you what happened next. One of the cinematographers, known for being extremely meticulous, decided to review all the equipment personally. He spent hours checking every component, every wire, every lens. He found absolutely nothing wrong. But as soon as the team tried to resume filming, the lights on set began to flicker, and in a matter of seconds, the entire electrical system collapsed. And here's the strangest detail. The problems only happened in specific scenes involving the greatest suffering of Jesus, such as the flagellation and the crucifixion. It was as if the environment itself was resisting the recreation of those images. But the moment that really gave everyone the chills was when the microphones picked up something that no one could explain. During a night scene, while Jesus was carrying the cross, the sound technicians clearly heard a voice whispering in Aramaic, the original language used in the film. The problem: none of the actors were speaking at that time, and when they tried to identify where the sound was coming from, they realized that there was no one nearby. They tried to reproduce the audio, but once again, the sound had disappeared. What was heard at the time of recording simply wasn't there. This sequence of events began to affect the team's morale. Some members came to believe that they were messing with something they shouldn't. Others said that the film was being protected by a spiritual force, and that these failures were a way of ensuring that the story was told in the right way. The tension reached such a high point that Mel Gibson decided to take a drastic measure. He brought a priest to the set, asking him to bless the location and the team. It was a simple ceremony, but it had an immediate impact. After the blessing, the cameras started working again. The sound became clear, the lights stopped failing, but that didn't mean that the set was free from the spiritual weight that hung over it. Even with the equipment working, the team couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was present. Some members reported feeling inexplicable chills, as if someone was watching every move. Others began to have frequent nightmares, dreaming of scenes from the film that hadn't even been filmed yet. And here's what makes me think to this day: how to explain all this? Coincidences? Technical problems? Maybe. But when so many unexplainable things happen in sequence, it's impossible not to wonder if there was a force, a presence, shaping every detail of this production. What happened in The Passion of the Christ wasn't just a technical challenge. It was a direct confrontation between technology and faith, between the physical and the spiritual world. And those who were there guarantee it wasn't just a movie, it was something much bigger. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever watched a movie that moved you so much that it felt like it wasn't just a story on the screen, but something that touched you in a way you couldn't explain? Because The Passion of the Christ wasn't just a film that provoked tears or shock. It was an experience that changed people in ways that go far beyond what anyone could expect. I remember when the film premiered in theaters. The theaters were packed, and the atmosphere was different from any other premiere I'd ever seen. People entered in silence, almost as if they were preparing for something sacred. But no one, absolutely no one, was prepared for what was going to happen. During the first screenings, strange reports began to emerge. People fainting in the middle of the session. People leaving the theater trembling, unable to articulate what they had just seen. At one of the sessions I went to, a woman simply screamed in the middle of the crucifixion scene. It wasn't a scream of fright, it was something deep, as if she was feeling that pain for real. And this didn't just happen in one place. In various parts of the world, stories of people having extreme physical reactions emerged. In some cities, there were cases of viewers who claimed to feel presences in the room. I'm not talking about special effects, but about something they described as an energy, a feeling that they weren't alone there. And you know what's most curious? It wasn't just religious people who felt this. People of different faiths, and even those who claimed not to believe in anything, left the sessions saying that the film had awakened something in them. Some reported that they had strange dreams after watching it. Others said that they began to rethink their own lives, their choices, as if the film had opened a door they didn't even know existed. And perhaps the most intriguing of all is the fact that, for many of these people, The Passion of the Christ was more than a cinematographic work. It was a catalyst, something that made them reconnect with feelings that were dormant or even find answers to questions they had carried for years. Now I ask you, could it be that all this was just the power of a good narrative, or was there something more? Something that crossed the screen and touched the heart of each spectator in a way that logic cannot explain? I leave that question in the air because, in the end, perhaps the answer isn't in the film's credits, but inside each of us. Have you ever stopped to think about what happens after the cameras stop rolling? After the set is dismantled, the costumes stored, and the film goes out into the world. We usually think that the actors and the crew simply move on, ready for the next project. But in the case of The Passion of the Christ, the story was quite different. Because the weight of that film didn't stay on the set. It accompanied every person who was part of that production. Caviezel, who played Jesus, is the clearest example of this. He knew that that role would be transformative, but he didn't. Imagine how much. After the filming, he couldn't go back to his normal life. In interviews, Jim said that the role of Jesus wasn't just an acting performance. It was an experience that changed the way he saw the world. He faced not only physical pain because of the intense scenes, but also an emotional impact that never disappeared. And the consequences went beyond the personal side. Jim's career in Hollywood was never the same again. He revealed that after the film's release, many doors closed to him in the industry. Some producers thought he was marked too much by the role of Jesus, as if he couldn't play anything else without carrying that weight. But do you know what he said about this? That he didn't regret it, that the spiritual impact of The Passion of the Christ was more important than any award or film contract. And he wasn't the only one. Maya Morgenstern, who played Mary, also felt the effect of the film long after the filming. She said that for months after the end of the project, she had recurring dreams with scenes she had lived on the set. But these dreams weren't just memories of the work. They came with such a strong emotional intensity that she woke up crying as if she was reliving the pain of that mother who lost her son. And you know what's more curious? Many of the members of the technical crew also carried something from that experience. Some talked about feeling an inexplicable presence even after returning home, as if what they lived on the set had left a mark that couldn't be erased. Others said that after the film they began to rethink their own lives, their beliefs, even the purpose of their careers. And it wasn't just about faith or spirituality. It was about the weight of the story they told. A story that speaks of sacrifice, pain, redemption. Themes that, when lived in such an intense way, leave marks that go beyond cinema. But perhaps the most surprising thing is the legacy that Mel Gibson himself carries. He invested millions of his own money to make the film happen, faced heavy criticism and controversies that could have destroyed his career. But he was convinced that this project wasn't just a film, it was a mission. And despite all the challenges, he also said that he didn't regret it. Because the impact of the Passion of the Christ was much greater than any box office or award. Now I ask you, what makes a film so powerful that it transforms and even haunts the lives of those who created it? Maybe it's because some stories are more than just narratives, they're mirrors that make us look inside ourselves. And the Passion of the Christ did exactly that, not only for the audience, but for everyone who participated in its creation. So, what do you think? Have you ever experienced something that marked you deeply, that changed the way you see the world? Leave your experience here in the comments. I want to know your opinion. And if you like this journey behind the scenes of the Passion of the Christ, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, activate the bell, and leave that like to strengthen. Until next time, with more stories that go far beyond the cameras.